Winchester, Dangerously Good Men. It's good to have you on the podcast, my friend.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
So obviously men heard in the intro that I experienced your event in December of last year. And what a game-changing event. And I got to be honest, I did not, before doing this work, rite of passage were two words or three words, I should say, that I was unfamiliar with and didn't even really know the importance of what rite of passage really even is or was. And I'd like to start there with the rite of passage. But before we start with that question and why rites of passages are so important, especially I would say nowadays, just explain to the men what your family looks like today and why you're so passionate about this mission.
So yeah, I've been married just over 23 years now to my wife, Christy. We met in high school and we got started having kids really quick, which was not our plan, but God has plans that override ours. And so by 24, I had three kids under four. And we found ourselves, let me fast forward to where we're at now, just so that people know. My daughter is going to be 22 here in a couple of months. My oldest boy is a junior in college and he's 20. And then my youngest is a senior in high school. He's 18. And we got a high school graduation and a college graduation coming up here. So we've run through and over the last few years been doing this initiation and this really intentional process with my kids to prepare them for stepping out on their own, and being ready to launch into the world where we as parents could be confident that they had the skills necessary and also the connection back to us that would serve them well, but then also that they were confident and didn't feel like they were unprepared. So that's just a real quick overview of where we're at and kind of what in the last few years prompted the work that has led to Dangerously Good Men. But really it all started for me and my desire to have this impact. It wasn't just fathers and sons. Excuse me. It wasn't just initiation rite of passages for boys. I really have for a long time wanted to see the family structure get better. And I think that started coming out of us having kids before all of our friends. So Christy and I were married young and had kids young, and all of our peers were still single, or when they did get married, they didn't have kids for a long time. And we found ourselves in a weird spot where there wasn't a lot of support around that. And I think it gave us an acute awareness of how the traditional family, the nuclear family unit, is not really supported in a lot of society today. And it needs to be strengthened and it needs to be defended. And that's one of the primary things I see in Dangerously Good Men and these initiations is that we connect fathers to their sons, we get an intergenerational connection, and we create a pathway forward so that, these family lines that are represented by the people that show up at our events, they can confidently believe that for generations to come, for me, the Winchester name is going to be synonymous with strong families that are making a positive impact on their community.
Well, it's already a popular name with rifles and stuff like that. So.
Right. Yeah.
A lot of men out there, I think, are wondering, well, rites of passage, isn't that something we did like a long time ago that really doesn't even serve us today? Like, why would we even do a rite of passage? And oh, by the way, what exactly does a rite of passage even entail?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've talked with a lot of guys and they have a similar kind of response. They're not really sure what it looks like, or the image they have is the African savannah, and the young boy gets sent out into the wilderness and don't come back till you kill a lion kind of thing. As foreign as kind of the concept seems, what I've found is that the idea of it and the need for it resonates in the souls of most men. Like they understand at a gut level that's something a boy needs to go through. And sadly, most of the men in my generation and younger, they know they didn't get that, at least not in a form that really mattered. There's so many of these things that tend to kind of play a substitute role, but Even in a call I was on this morning, I was talking with a man that he's struggling to get out of his own way in so many areas. And I didn't go straight there, but you can tie it back to, early adulthood, and this idea that he never quite had anybody move him confidently into manhood and assure him that he had what it took to go out and proceed through life in a way that he didn't always second guess his efforts.
I think that's one of the biggest stumbling blocks. I think, I look back on, I was going to start a rite of passage. And actually that's how you, funny enough, how you started yours, right? Was I was going to do a rite of passage. And to be honest, I didn't really know when I launched it. I was like, I think I have an idea of what it should look like. And I did a lot of research around rites of passage. I really went down the rabbit hole of like what rites of passage really look like. And I was fascinated by different cultures and different beliefs and why rites of passage were important. And I was like, oh my gosh, like we actually need this now today more than ever,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm being honest. And I took my boys on a somewhat rite of passage back in 2018, which was a weekend trip to Colorado. We hiked up a 14er, which is a 14,000-foot mountain. The mountain was, it was a 12-hour round trip, hike. And we stopped strategically, every few hours. And I read a letter to them that I wrote to them. And I picked out these 7 pillars of going from boyhood to manhood, honesty, integrity, money management, surrounding yourself with the right friends, iron sharpens iron, peer pressure, all these different things. But it was basically a letter and an experience, right? And then the summit represented that's the last steps of your boyhood. And then as soon as we started descending, that is the representation of now you're stepping into young manhood.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know at the time what I didn't know. And then I decided I'm going to go ahead and really do some research. And I was fascinated by what I found. And then COVID hit. And then I decided to cancel the event altogether because no one could really travel. Well, then you picked up the reins and created Dangerously Good Men. And I'm so glad that you did, because to be honest, I knew after researching rites of passage why they were important, because I knew my kids were literally right around the corner, because at the time they were 11 and 12, and it was right around the corner. Their friends were going to start vaping. They were going to be exposed to drugs and alcohol. They were going to be exposed to stealing and all these other things that boys are exposed to, young kids. And what am I going to do proactively to prep my kids to do the right thing? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Something that they could really, really lean into. And to be honest, I was still like struggling what that would look like. And there's a part of me, man, that was kind of like paralyzed by like, this has got to be perfect. And then you came along and you created this event over the past couple of years. And the experience, because I took Mason through it, like I said, in the beginning of December, and the experience of it, being able to just sit back, not necessarily not sit back, there was work that was obviously involved in it, but just to sit back and be guided, right? Of just showing up and then being guided and going through this with him. It was such a beautiful learning opportunity. But as far as how you created your event around these pillars, and I would call them, I don't want to spoil for anybody, but these arrows that all mean something. But when a man thinks about a rite of passage and the outcome that he wants for his son and for him too, what have you found now doing a few of these that have been the most meaningful outcomes for men and their kids, their boys?
Talking with the guys that have gone through it, the most common thing that I get, and the one that the guys are most excited about, is, we go through these core values and talk about how they apply to stepping into manhood and living, heroically, and they've created this touch point that makes it, one of the dads said it's like having the cheat codes for all of these conversations about significant things, whether it's lying to mom or hitting the brother or sister, or not doing their chores, not taking responsibility for keeping their spaces clean. Having gone through the experience, and I think one of the things too that's powerful about it is it's not just one father and one son. You're there with a group of men going through it together. So there's this kind of peer dynamic to it. There's leaders that are there, and there's a heightened expectation of men doing what is important and right and good in the whole event. And so then you leave the event, and it's created this opportunity for fathers and sons to ask, you can ask your son, were you behaving heroically in that instance? Was that in line with the core values we talked about? Is that an action that keeps you on the path towards the outcome that we're looking for, or have you stepped off the path there? And it doesn't even have to be that much. It can be as simple as a question, was that a heroic way of acting? And you sit back and you let your son process that and respond to you. And the way that creates an ownership for our sons is huge, because, I'm a visual guy, and I'm always thinking about ways to kind of tie the importance of this into images that we can see. And I think of it as, as fathers, our responsibility is to put some guidelines and some boundaries in place, not as restrictions necessarily, but as just these bright indicators of where we're trying to go, as opposed to coming in after the fact and trying to salvage the situation. So I think of it like, in the case of a fire, you build a fire ring and to contain the fire, and that fire could get big and hot, and it can do a lot of good things, but that keeps it from getting out of control. The less proactive approach is to be the fire extinguisher in your son's life, and you wait until things start going wrong and you come flying in and you try and put out the fire. And I've found in my own life that when those situations are what's going on, there's very little learned by my sons, by my daughter. If I'm coming in and I'm trying to put out a fire in a hurry before, all hell breaks loose, it's usually not the circumstance where a lot is learned.
I agree, and it's almost like our brains aren't, our brains are not wired to learn in that moment because we're in a fight or flight response.
Mm-hmm.
I just interviewed a gentleman by the name of Andy Way right before this podcast, and he's got this mission around adventure. And he talked about adventure, which is seeking excitement, exploring the unknown, getting uncomfortable, and then allowing to learn new things. That was like his whole shtick on this thing. And I look at your event as this beautiful way for a son and a father to get away from all the distractions, from all perhaps a situation that could result in reactivity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where there aren't any lessons learned. I remember being at your event with Mason and these incredible conversations that took place outside of the evolutions that you put us through. And I want to use the word evolutions very, very carefully, because it's not like we were going through a beatdown. Like I've done the Squire, which is Bedros Keuilian's program, which I did enjoy that. And I've done Dangerously Good Men with you. And I will tell you, like the Squire was great, right? And there were beatdowns that were associated with it, but manageable. Yours, I would say, was more like this tough love, yet very beautiful, compassionate way of doing it, right? And then putting us men and our kids through some experiences where we're learning some of these core values. But a lot of the really incredible connections happened outside of those, where we had the free time.
Yeah.
These conversations would come up between, Mason and I, and he would share with me, and I don't want to share too much because he's in high school now, and he sees his old man pulling up in his Jeep with the Dad Edge logo on it and that kind of thing. I know a lot of his friends, like, they listen to my podcast, stuff like that. So I'm not going to share I'm not going to share the conversations that came out, but I will share that it was conversations that I wouldn't have had otherwise, about things that were going on with friends, quote unquote friends, or people he knew in his life that weren't making the best choices. I don't know if that conversation would have come out otherwise. Perhaps maybe it would have come out in another way. Maybe he would have gotten roped into something or stuck in a group where something bad happened. And, but it really created this incredible space where we could be proactive. And, I got to have those conversations of like, well, that's interesting that so-and-so is doing that. Tell me your thoughts on that. What do you stand for? Right. And it just created this space for him to articulate, well, here's how I think about that. And here's what I think about moving forward. And I think your event really created a situation for him to kind of stake his own flag in the ground and say, that's not the direction I'm going in. And it also helped, by the way, sharing that time and that space with other young men, other boys his age, had the same core values, or at least we're identifying those moving forward. And then us as men, I did this with 6 other fathers, and we got to have that iron sharpens iron connection as well. and we
Mm.
all got to really dig into each other's strengths. So I really, really like that proactivity approach because, man, when we're reactionary, holy cow, like
Yeah.
we could just be exposed to anything.
Yeah.
Um, core values. I want to go back to this real quick.
Hmm.
Why, what are core values as it relates to rite of passage and why are they important?
So I think I'll start with the second part of it. Why are they important? And this is something I've been thinking on recently a lot. Um, and talking with men my age that, again, are looking back on how they were raised, whether they felt like they had a great dad or not. They the majority of men in our generation weren't put through any kind of an initiation or rite of passage. It was, for a lot of guys, they graduate high school and they go off to college, and that's kind of the big rite of passage into living on their own. Or if they don't do that, they go to trade school or they get married or something like that. Those can be these rites of passage that will call a man into a greater level of responsibility. Typically that's where we find a good kind of calling forward, is when we're looking to serve others, be it a wife or children, those kind of situations. Now we can have negative experiences that kind of drag us into manhood too, and we don't need to go into all of those, but these core values are these timeless things. Because as men that are looking back on our past and saying, I wasn't initiated, and I didn't feel like my father gave me a pathway forward, and because of that, I took this wandering path to where I am now. And regardless of how I feel about that, I've got issues with how that went. And then we look at the world that our kids are growing up in, and it's a totally different world. I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't have, social media. I didn't have all of these things to deal with when I was 10, 11, 12 years old. And now kids do. The thing I love about core values is they're timeless. These are the things that we put into our lives, that it doesn't matter if, now my son's got to deal with apps on a phone that I didn't have to. The core values haven't changed. What they're pointing us to, and the behaviors that we want to have in our lives, they go outside of all the different circumstances and demographics. And then as far as defining what they are, we have 6 of them that we use, and it fits the heroic model that we go through. We have a mantra that we've put to each of those. But you kind of touched on this a little bit. When we lead men and their sons through this work, it really is a high level thing that we're trying to fill out as much information and give as much of a tool as possible, but it's very customizable, if that makes sense. We want the fathers and sons to leave our event and take this and internalize it, make it their own. So we'll put a mantra with each of these core values describing what it is. And I feel like the 6 that we're working with are very solid. If a young man takes these 6 core values of honorable, enterprising, responsible, original, intimate, and creative, and they look to try and balance all of those in their lives and use those as they're making decisions, I feel it's going to serve them really well.
I
Go
agree.
ahead.
I was just going to say, I agree. We have some messages here in the chat that I want to get to as well. Just some questions from our other guys here. I, I would love for you to just give an overview of what each one of those mean, just so it really
Yeah.
resonates with men. And then I want to share how I'm going to be, I don't want to spoil the outcome, but this rite of passage is not meant to be a one and done event, which is the thing that I love about Dangerously Good Men. It is meant to actually be a launching pad.
Mm-hmm.
And so I am actually going to be giving Mason something here next month. We're actually flying out to Texas to go on a hunting trip together.
Awesome.
And my plan is to give him one of his arrows and I'll share the reasons why. But I would love for you to go over what each one of these mean.
Yeah. So we just starting at the top, honorable. It's do the right thing no matter what. And like I said, that's a very simple mantra that can be tied to it, and that father and son can go over together. The young man can remember that easily, and it can be leaned upon, in those moments when he's challenged with an opportunity to take advantage of a circumstance, share some answers on a test, or even cut the corner in a run for practice or whatever. we want to do the right thing. Now that can be built out, and you can adapt that and personalize it for each family circumstance. But at its base level, it's really easy to understand. Enterprising is keep moving forward. We're going to find a way, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the challenges, to keep moving forward. And you can apply that to so many different things, whether it be, health and fitness stuff, whether it be development of, better skills in a sport, or working on a grade in a particularly challenging class. Responsible, this is one I love, and it is so easy to apply to so many things, but we say master of self, servant of others. A dangerously good man is looking to be not a doormat, but he's out there looking to serve others and help elevate the circumstances of those that he loves in his closest circle and the community that he comes in contact with. And we can't do that. We can't serve others well if we haven't mastered our own stuff. Original, we talk about being comfortable around others and not a copy of others. And this is something, all of these are great to start as soon as you can, but this is one that, especially with the young man, this is something that needs to be done. And in this day and age with social media and so many, trends and things that they're going to see on their phone, and so many things that are going around where everybody's got to have the same this or that. So quickly, the originality and the uniqueness of our children can be beat out of them by the society around them, especially in the public schools and the public square. We want them to be comfortable around other people, not isolated, not completely cut off, but we don't want them to always be copying others. We want them to be confident in who they are. Intimate. This is another one that, especially our generation, yours and mine, coming off of the last couple generations of fathers, starting back in World War II, and the generation that came back from that, and just the disconnect as work circumstances changed and moms became primary caregivers in the house. We don't see a lot of men that are comfortable with intimacy, even with the word. And we talk about this. It's very applicable to a 10, 11, 12-year-old. We want to have depth. So we say in friendships, in love, and in life, we want to be a man of depth. It's not just surface level stuff. So many men have a bunch of guys that they could go get a beer with, or go, shoot some hoops. But when it comes to the trouble in their lives, they got nobody to talk to. And we want these young men to start early, building friendships and support systems that go beyond the surface level. And then creative. And we want to talk with our sons about always be creating, not just consuming. So much of what young people are drawn to now is these screens where they can just keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and they're constantly being fed a bunch of entertainment and stimulation, but they need to be creating something with that. There's a power within these young men and young women, but it doesn't do any good if they never bring it out into, birth it into some creativity.
Oh man. So that definitely gives us some context. The question I have for you is, so I know that you like to do these in between the ages of 11 and 15.
Yep.
Two-part question here. Number one, why those ages?
Mm-hmm.
And then the question I have for you, so men who have kids who are, let's just say a baby, right? Like maybe 15 months old, or even in the toddler stage, or maybe even in like the older toddler stage. Like I have a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old. So like those ages beforehand, what can we start doing to prepare the way for what they're going to experience as teenagers? So again, two-part question, why the age range between 11 and 15? And then certain things that we can do to be proactive, less reactive in those early ages.
Yeah. Yeah. So the age range is there's kind of a bottom and a top answer, a lower limit and upper limit. Really, for boys in particular, and it's a similar kind of thing for girls. It's just, it happens at a little bit different time. But for boys in particular, right around 11 years old, 10, 11, 12, they start having those physical changes due to puberty that are not just, going to be the outwardly visible things, but mentally they're having a change chemically in their brain. They're starting to transition out of this only seeking pleasure, only doing what is easy kind of thing, being entertained, into a process where they're starting to, question their place in the world. They're starting to recognize the power that they have inside them. We see toddlers and they're strong and they're knocking their blocks over after they build them up. And that's a part of what boys just naturally do. but they'll start getting this understanding that there's more to life than that. And this is where we want to make sure we capture that as soon as we can. We don't want to miss the opportunity to start answering some of these questions with them, not necessarily for them. A lot of these things, we want to have strong, confident adult men. They need to answer some of these questions on their own, or they're always going to feel like their power and their strength comes from somebody else giving it to them. But when dad steps in and starts guiding them through this process of understanding how it can happen, that's a really powerful thing. The upper limit is because, like you said, I don't view this initiation process as an ending where, okay, now son, you're done and off you go. We want to have some time with our sons before they go out so that we can take these lessons that are started at the initiation and we can really intentionally go through them. The word I like to use, and you'll probably remember it from the commissioning ceremony that we had, is installation. And it's a slight variation, it's not installation, it's instillation, which, the definition from a medical thing, which you might know a little bit more of with your background, is, it's a method used to put a liquid into a body very, very slowly, a drop at a time. And in the same way, we want to instill these core values slowly so they get in there deep and they're stuck. They're there long term. We could take an 18-year-old kid and go on some kind of extreme hike along a section of the Pacific Crest Trail or whatever, kind of brutally beat them down. And at each refreshing meal where we finally refuel, we talk about one of these core values, and it may have some significance, but if all we do is that, and then 6 months later they find themselves in a trying circumstance, those core values aren't deep. They're not a part of his character, and that's what we want. So part of the reason we stop at 15 is I want to have a couple of years for these fathers and sons to work together. If 15 years old, they got 3 years. You take 6 months for each of these core values to really intentionally instill that value in your son. You show up at 12, you got a year for each of them that you get to work with. And then real quickly, the other reason is because, as you know, we challenge and commission the fathers when they leave to go find some other men of significance to get involved in this, because one of the most powerful things, and part of what was so inspirational to me, was dropping my oldest boy off at college with a quiver full of arrows. It also had 6 letters in it, and only one of them was from me. And the other 5 were from other men of significance in his life, so that if ever he couldn't reach dad, or for whatever reason he didn't feel confident to reach out to dad, my son has 5 other men that have committed to any time of day, call me, I'll be there, I've got your back. And that's not something that you do in a weekend. That's not something that you very quickly just, pick the top 5 guys out of your contact list. It's something we do with intention.
I totally agree, man. It's funny you mentioned that, because you and I both know Coach Jake, because you're in the Accelerator Mastermind. I flew Coach Jake into St. Louis last month to basically run. And by the way, we're talking about Jake Herbert, the American wrestling legend, like America's boy, like when it came to wrestling back in 2012 and then 2016. He was a silver medalist back in 2012, and just a phenomenal wrestler. I think he was 9-time national champion. And so he came in town, and just one thing he told me before he came in town, he was just like, hey man, like, are we going to get some time, like maybe over dinner or something like that? Or like, I can go for a walk with you and your boys and I can just pour into them. And I was just like, I mean, I don't know about you, Bill, but I mean, luckily doing this work, we have men like that in our lives, but most men don't have men like that in their lives. And I'm like, yeah, man, like, let's do that.
Oh, I'll tell you what, Jake's great.
Yeah.
Because my son Zeke, who's the senior in high school, coming off an extended football season and then going into wrestling, having to cut weight, was really, really struggling. And what a blessing it was to have Jake's number. And he was so gracious to get on the phone, talk with Zeke, and he told him, he said, call me anytime. You don't need your dad to connect me. You've got my number now. And the power and impact that has when a man that your son could respect outside of his connection to you not only connects back to you in the presence of your son, but then wants to pour into him. There's just a deep impact there that can't be manifested any other way.
I could not agree more. I could not agree more. And that's exactly what happened out of that meeting. So Jake poured into my kids. They swapped phone numbers, and I told my boys at dinner, I was like, after all this stuff happened, I said, hey, if you ever come to the crossroads of something in your life and you think that I might not understand and you feel comfortable reaching out to Jake, you have my full permission to do so.
Mm.
And they both,
Yeah.
even my oldest one was like, are you serious? I'm like, yeah, I'm serious. And they're like, you be comfortable with that? I'm like, absolutely. I was like, I trust Jake. We have an iron sharpens iron, friendship. And here's what I'll tell you about Jake, because Jake and I actually made this agreement before the kids even got there. And I learned this actually from Stephen Mansfield, who's the New York Times bestselling author of Building a Brand of Brothers, Mansfield book of Manly Men and Men on Fire, is that you have to have other good men in your boy's life. You have to.
Mhm.
And the what I learned from Steven and the agreement that Jake and I came to was, I said, Jake, if my boys ever come to you and they share something with you that they really need your help with, and they're in no real danger and you can help them and they come to you confidentially, you have my permission not to tell me. Now, if there's danger or there's a pregnancy or there's something big, right? Somebody's gonna go to
Mhm.
jail, there's drugs or something like that. Someone's gonna endanger somebody. I think we all agree I need to know that information. Absolutely, right? But if everybody's safe and they're good and that kind of thing, then I trust you.
Yeah.
And I told my boys that. And I said, when you have sons, it's most or kids, you have to have people like that in your kid's life, to where, as much as we would love to always be the go-to, we might always not always be the go-to. But we
Mhm.
have to be able to give our kids other good relationships, other good men that they can go to if needed, right? Because we don't want them holding it in. Um, Real quick, the story I want to share here is, so I'm going to give Mason his first arrow, because we leave these and there's a reason. So I'm going to give him enterprising. So Mason just finished wrestling season. And so did my oldest Ethan, but Mason in particular, Mason's one of those kids. He was second in state when he was little, wrestling. And then the year after that, I think he was 9, he got 5th in state. So he was really used to winning wrestling. He's always been one of those quote unquote athletic kids, and losing to him is hard.
Mhm.
And this freshman year wrestling, he's been out of the wrestling game for 4 years. This really gave him a big old slice of humble pie. And I think he lost his first 5 matches out of the gate. And I know it really got to him. Well, then he got injured his knee. Then he got sick, but still went to practice, worked around it. I think he got over that. Then he got sick, was out for like a week on that one. Then he hurt his shoulder. Then he got ringworm. Then he got impetigo. And it was going through his entire team like crazy. And then, but he ended up finishing the season. I think he finished season 11-11. But
Mhm.
he had kids on his team because, like, especially this ringworm and impetigo and kids were getting sick. They were just quitting. They're
Yeah.
like, well, too many challenges. I'm just quitting. I'm just out. Mason, I never heard him complain. I knew he was frustrated. Oh my God. I felt like he could bite through a nail sometimes because he was just losing his mind with how many challenges came his way. But it was challenge after challenge after challenge. And he wasn't winning. His final 2 weeks, though, his record was 6-2. So he
Nice.
really ramped up on his last few weeks, and he really ramped up all these wins. So everything started clicking at the end. But I know that he was hurting up until then. So I'm going to give him the enterprise arrow, and I'm going to do it. And I'm going to read him this letter. And I'm going to hand over the arrow. I'm going to tell him, like, you found a way.
Mhm.
Like, all these things happen. I'm going to list them off, but you found a way. You didn't give up. You didn't complain. You just kept going. And I'm going to tie that into all the things that he's going to be faced with growing up. I was like, you're going to
Yeah.
experience this in school. You'll experience it with friends. You're going to go out and try to do this, this, and this. And you're going to have obstacles constantly. Always refer back to this moment as the time that you were enterprising and you didn't give up. And that's what I love about Dangerously Good Men is it's not necessarily just the event, hey, one and done. It's this launching pad experience that a dad can, like, literally, like, this is the foundation of some of the things that I get to teach him. He gets to experience, and then he gets to have the experience of being rewarded and
Mhm.
and we've already got him the shadow box, the whole nine yards. So every time he looks at that shadow box and he looks at those arrows, he's going to remember the experience that went with that, not just the event itself, but the experience for all those arrows that he can then take into his life as he goes to face life head on, which I love.
Yeah.
That's why I really love this event.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we all need as men and, young boys. We need those moments we can look back on and remember when we were strong. And those are the things that help us continue to be that way.
I agree. I want to go back to this question though, for boys who are maybe younger than this. Let's
Yeah.
just call it the 6 to 10 range.
Hmm.
Um, what are just what are some things that we can do that you've seen work with maybe other men that you've worked with, or just things you've worked with in your own family that have been most useful?
Yeah, yeah. And this one, there's a couple of different things, and depending on people's, family and situation, it can be a little more challenging sometimes if people aren't living close to maybe the grandparents or other relatives that are older. But I really find a couple of things. One, we want to make sure that our sons in particular just know very, very strongly how much they're loved, that there's no question in their mind. Eldridge talks in some of his books about being the beloved boy. That's the first stage. You just know, and that belovedness, understanding that, it comes from understanding that just by being my dad's son, I'm enough. And we really want to install that foundation early, because the challenges are going to come later, and all of these things that every young man goes through are going to make us question that. And the stronger that foundation is, that my dad loves me just because I'm his son. So I really like to see that, and that comes through a lot of shared time together, doing fun things together, finding ways to say yes more often. Obviously not to everything they want, and it's not ice cream every day, but finding ways to have those adventures at their level, whether they're 4 years old or 7 years old or whatever is exciting and fun to them, be a part of that. And then the other thing that I find is really important and impactful is helping them connect to the older generation. So if grandma and grandpa are around, get with grandpa together, connect the generations. What we really want to do is help our young men understand where they come from. So we're building that identity. It's easy enough inside the home where they live to recognize, help them understand that they're the beloved boy, but we want to tie them to a past, and all the good that's in it if we can. And in the circumstances, my grandparents were dead before I was born on one side of my family, and the others lived across the state, or across the country rather. If you don't have them nearby, find some surrogate grandparents, find some people from the older generation, connect your kids to them early, help them start having an understanding of where things are going. And then the last thing is, help them get an understanding of what a good man does, and the challenge that is a part of that being a good man is about doing some of these hard things, and build an expectation. So we've got a book that we share with all the guys that go through the program that is aimed, at 10 to 12-year-olds. Some kids can start a little bit younger, and it's a great avenue to do it. But even, 5, 6, 7 years old, start talking about the idea of initiation with your son. Start building up the idea that, you aren't always going to be a little boy, and there's going to be this challenging period of time, and I'm going to be there to help you. And if grandpa or Uncle John's around, whoever it is, we're going to walk you through it, but it's going to be something that you have to rise up to. Little boys as young as 6, 7 years old, they love the idea of rising up to a challenge.
I agree, man. I love that. I want to speak really quickly here, and I want you to share your thoughts on this, because you and I had a bit of an experience with a person in my life who I see him going through some things with his son, right? I shared with him, and this is where I think I'm gonna rattle some dudes right now. I'm gonna use my words to shake you by the shoulders a little bit and share with you why I think that this is important. So luckily, like I said, I've gone through the Squire. That was a great experience, because Ethan and I, my oldest, have always referred back to the lessons there. Mason and I went through Dangerously Good Men, and we always refer back to these incredible things. And now I get to go on this journey with him for the next 3 years of him earning these arrows, right? And building this man from the inside out that he's going to be. You spoke about being reactive, right? And the danger in that, and how great it is to be proactive. Whether you're in a reactive situation or not, this is where I want to speak to the mindset of men who, you know, don't want to invest their time, their energy, and resources into something like this. So I referred a man to you, and I know this man well, and I know his kid, and there's a lot of things going on, a lot of challenges. I'll leave it at that. I'm not going to get specific, but a lot of challenges, a lot of things. As a father, you're like, holy cow, like I'm up against a few things here. And here's what I'll tell you. Connected him to you. I connected to him afterwards, and he's just like, just really busy this season, and I have a lot going on. And, this rite of passage is, it's not cheap. And, I just don't think, I don't think I can do it. And he listed off all these other things. Like, I've got this vacation planned, and I've got, we need some new flooring in our kitchen, and we need this and we need that. And dude, it took everything I had to be like, are you freaking kidding me, man? Like, your vacation and your flooring, this is more important.
Yeah.
Because we both know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't say that. I was very direct with him, but this is how I want to speak to him. I was like, we both know what's going on here. You can get flooring anytime.
Yeah.
You can go on vacation anytime. You have this small window. You've got this one shot right now. You've got this small window of opportunity to change a path, man.
Mm-hmm.
Like, to make a difference. And this is what I told this guy. I was like, dude, whether you think so or not, your son is looking for you to lead him.
Yeah.
Whether he's like, Dad, you're so annoying, or whatever. No, I was like, deep down, that man is begging for you to lead him.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Otherwise, I don't think he'd be doing some of the things he's doing.
Yeah.
And this guy had such a line of BS, man. And what I'll tell you is, the men that I got to spend that weekend with, at your event, they weren't of that mindset. They were like, oh, no. This is not just important. This is so important.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that will literally, I will go to my grave, and so will my son. We will always remember this.
Yeah.
And perhaps even if he's a teenager, right? Because I think we're so short-sighted sometimes in what we think is important. Like, oh, it's just a teenage years. Oh, he's just being a teenager, which, by the way, I hate that statement. He's just being a teenager. No, that's not fine. Number one. But think about this. How is your son going to leverage those lessons from what he learned at an event like this, and the journey that you took him on, where he earned things, when he's 45 years old and he's got kids of his own and he's married? He's going to look back and be like, I remember when I earned the honorable arrow. Mm-hmm. I remember that season in my life as a kid. And now I'm going to pass this. This is where I say this type of work, man. And I know I'm getting worked up here. This is legacy work. Legacy work. Because what we do and what we don't do with our kids, it will trickle into them being an adult. We're going to see it in them, in their relationships, in their friendships, in their professions. We're going to see it in our grandkids. We're even going to see it, if God blesses us enough with this much time, in our great grandkids. Yeah. This is lineage work, right? Yeah. I want you to really speak to the men out there who just perhaps they're not there yet in their mind. And I know maybe verbally I gave him a real kick in the rear end, but I would just love for you to just take all of just who you are as Bill Winchester and Dangerously Good Men, and your passion for this, and just state, what could be the mindset shift here for guys?
Yeah, I remember that conversation, the call I had with the guy you're talking about, and I remember closing it out and using very similar, maybe not quite as aggressive, but trying to help him understand just what you said. This is about the lineage before you, your last name, put your name in there, the blank lineage going forward. You get to make a decision right now that changes the trajectory. And for me, and this is part of what we talked about at the event too, so much of what I try to communicate to the people around me, to my family, my son, when they're dealing with struggles in sports or whatever, it really doesn't matter that much where you're at right now. We need to know where we're at, but that's all we need to know. After that, we need to know where we're headed. And that's what we can, you know, the decisions we make affect that bearing, that heading that we're on, and that multiplied over time changes everything. You know, and as you were describing to me what you said, I'm thinking about this guy, you know, how much more would he rather in 30 years be having his son and grandson come over and help him put in those floors that they're finally getting around to, and they're happy to do together, because he's got a relationship with his son and his grandson that is so solid and strong because of the sacrifice of floors that he made to make an investment in his son's life. You know, probably the most pointed thing I could say, we did our very first one of these events, and the day that I got back, so the event ends on a Saturday, and then my family comes up and hangs out with me at the lodge for another day, and we do some cleanup and we just kind of decompress. So the Sunday after our first event, we're here in Bend, Oregon, and the day that we got home, we had a guy leave his apartment and walk into the grocery store mall around the corner from him. So this is a 21-year-old, 22-year-old kid, and just started shooting up the stores on his way in. And he went in and he ended up murdering 2 people before taking his own life. And I quickly got to see, because of what was being released, the writings of this kid. And this kid was desperately crying out for someone to acknowledge that he mattered, for someone to pour into his life and give him some reason to continue through the struggles. It clarified everything in that moment. Like, this is why we need to do this. We have young men and young women, but we have a generation coming up that does not know that they matter, that does not know how to deal with the challenges in front of them. And we need to connect these generations, and we need to transform these family lines and get them headed on a right course. You know, you don't have to just open up your computer or your phone and you're trying to be sold something all the time. Everything and anything out there is available, but what we need to be investing in as men is our families.
I agree, man. And I honestly, I think now more than ever, like, all you have to do is open up social media and you see the stuff that these kids are exposed to. And I mean, I'm sure my grandfather, God rest his soul, he passed away in 1998. And he was pretty much my father. And I remember the last few years he was retired. Like, he was a great, good. I mean, he was a dangerously good man. Like, he would love this stuff. But he'd be like, this whole country's going to hell. You know, and like, so I'm sure, you know, our generation of parents and grandparents, they saw the next generation like, oh my gosh, like, these are the people taking care of me. Are you serious right now? So I'm sure that there were always fear. Always been fear about that. But this generation in particular, man, like, we've never been exposed to so much information in our lives. And when I see the stuff my kids are up against, I'm just like, geez, this is like, literally the world is starving for dangerously good men to step
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, for a while, I found myself looking around trying to think, how do we fix this mess? You know, just what you're talking about, what we see. And there's not another politician that we could elect. There's not another law we could put in place that's going to fix this. You know, we can't, as fathers in our generation, do anything to this world that will make it safer or better for our kids growing up, but we can strengthen them. And as they grow into that world, they can change it. You know, for the longest time when I would see some of these things talking about, you know, the children are the future, and so much of it was kind of sappy and cheesy, and, you know, we got to invest in it. Like, so much of what you see out there, it's like they're the future for the world. Yes, but not if we don't do it right. Like, they are, honestly. But if we don't serve them well by helping them be dangerously good men, then we've got a very bleak future in front of us. And, you know, it's easy to look at that for our individual families and to selfishly think, I want something better for my kids than what I had. And I want it to continually get better and better. But when we look at the ripple effect that a good man in a community can have, it really will quickly go beyond just our family line. Because, so much of these core values, it's not about taking this focused inward kind of approach to making your life as good as it can be, and that's all you focus on. In the process of becoming a dangerously good man, you impact others and you pull them along with you, and it really is how we change the world, 2 generations at a time.
I cannot agree more, man. So I want to. I know I went on a rant, which, by the way, I'm not sorry about whatsoever.
Not at all.
So if I offended you in the audience, or if I rattled you, well, then good. Perhaps maybe it forced you to maybe take some action, or at least look at this through a different lens of what's truly important. I'll say that. I want to share with the men the logistics of the events coming up, and just so they kind of get a good feel of what's included.
Yeah.
I will say this side note. It's one of the most majestic locations I've ever seen in my life. Now, granted, I did it in winter, so I got to see, like, it literally looked like something out of Chronicles of Narnia. But the lodge we stayed at was incredible. The food was amazing. Like, I felt like, in a way, this is a beautiful rite of passage and so powerful, but we also were taken very good care of, during this process. So share the logistics with us.
Yeah. Well, and to that end, I kind of want to circle back, because you're talking about the Squire program versus this, and some of the differences there. And I've listened to Bedros's stuff and read his book, and I love what he's got going. And I won't say anything negative about that program.
Sure.
I don't have any experience with it. And I'll honestly say, like, I am not a military guy. I don't have that background. I know that a lot of what he does is kind of tied to that. What I will say, and part of what caused, led me to structure our event the way I did, is my years of coaching youth sports with my boys, the football teams in particular, and what, some of the biggest boys on a youth football team are going to be the boys that were always a little bigger. And when they're always a little bigger than their peers, it almost doesn't matter what their background is, but they have a tendency to potentially be a little bit of a bully, a little bit of a rely on their size and not do the work kind of thing. And we had a number of kids that way. And if I had taken the approach, as I started to at one point, and one of my assistant coaches did, that we were going to do the beat down method to get him corrected and in line, he would have just quit. Like you were talking about some of the kids on your son's wrestling team. But if we create a positive shared goal that they're all on board for, the amount of suffering that they would go through and the amount of behavior change in this young man that went beyond the football field into the classroom. I mean, we had teachers and principals at the schools that some of these boys were at coming to us and giving us information because they knew that the commitment to this program that these young boys had gave us, as volunteer coaches, an influence in their life that could change their behavior in the classroom. So it started back there in, sixth, fifth grade football, seeing that a shared vision can create and pull us forward across some of these challenges. And when we put a son and a father in a circumstance where that can happen, and we're not beating them down nonstop. Now, we have some challenging things that we do as a part of the event. And I mean, it snowed like crazy the couple days before you guys showed up. So our climb up the mountain was particularly brutal, but that shared suffering is a part of it. And then the excellent level that we try to serve the fathers and sons there, I think, creates an expectation for what the time that the fathers and sons are going to spend together going forward is going to be. You don't start off with the event that we have, and then, the sons leave thinking that, this is going to be some rinky dink thing that, on Saturday, dad's going to get me up early and drag me down to, the IHOP. And that's where this is going. It sets an expectation for excellence, and it builds an anticipation in our sons for something great. So that's part of why we do that. We have 14 spots left in our events this year. We have 6 spots available for our August event, and we have 8 spots in December. So August is an incredible time up at the event, very different than what you experienced, where we have a private lake in a couple hundred acres of private forest up in the Cascade Mountains, 6,000 square foot lodge. Every father, son gets their own room with a bathroom, really nice facilities. We bring a private chef. We go through a combination of discussion and teaching sessions and activity sessions, 15 of them total, that lead through the process of where you're starting, what you're going to be leaving with, and everything in between. We lay out the core of why it is important to go through an initiation, and we get to those core values. So I mean, just a real quick overview. We talk about why we're there. We talk about what we're aiming at as young men and fathers and why it's important. We talk about some of the pitfalls along the path. That's one of the things that the fathers have talked about, being really powerful too, is I can, as a guy leading this, bring up topics like drugs and pornography and sex in a way that isn't at all awkward for the dad to then say, hey, that thing Bill mentioned, is that something we should talk about? It makes it so much easier for a son to go to his dad and say, yeah, Dad, someone showed me something on their phone at school and I wasn't sure what it was. Is that what Bill was talking about? So we try to take some of the awkwardness out of it. We try to break the ice in some of these situations that fathers typically find themselves a little bit concerned about going into. We talk about the importance of connection and developing a deep connection and not falling into the lone wolf syndrome. We talk about, how this really is a beginning point, and going forward, the young men are going to start taking on more of the load, and it's going to be something that together with their dads, they're going to work through the challenges ahead of them. And we really go into helping create a space where father and son, separate and then together, can work on a vision of what the future looks like. We want the guys to be leaving the event with a really good idea of what the next couple of years look like, where they want that outcome, where the son wants to be at 18, what the father wants to have taught his son by that time, the experiences they want to have shared. And then we do a really good job, I think, of commissioning, we call it, and challenging the fathers to step into this role, kind of passing the baton or the arrows, if you will, from the leadership of the event into the father's hands, and challenging him to go and get some other men to come alongside him. I'm excited about the mastermind that we're creating to get started here soon to help supporting these fathers after the fact. We've got a lot of guys that are reaching out with younger sons that are wanting to know if there's something we can do to support them kind of ahead of time in those couple of years leading up to it. And we're certainly working on that. And then we've got a lot of guys asking, is there something I can do with my daughter? And my daughter is graduating with her degree in child development and family services here in a couple of months. And I'm excited about bringing her on board to help me start putting something together that hopefully by next year we'll have something for fathers and daughters.
Wow. Okay. I didn't know that. I mean, obviously I'm a good friend of yours, and I believe in what you're doing. That is a question that's repeatedly come up. When is there going to be something for daughters? Not necessarily directed towards Bill Winchester and Dangerously Good Men, but even ever since when I was going to launch my own program 2 years ago, 3 years ago now. And well, can daughters come? And I'm like, well, no, this is for sons. And they're like, well, are you going to have something for daughters? And I'm sitting there thinking, like, I wouldn't even know where to start there. So
Yeah.
the fact that your wheels are already turning in that direction, that is going to be a massive service to the guys who have been asking about this for years. So good on you, gentlemen. Listen, I will attest, one of the best things I have ever invested my time, my money, my resources, my energy into was with Mason on this trip. And because like I said, we did it in December. We continue to have conversations around it. You want to hear something really funny, Bill? So
Yeah.
you and I are, we're having this discussion, this recording the day after Super Bowl. And Mason had friends over last night. And the funny thing about it is that I asked him about one of the boys in particular. I said, is he a dangerously good man, or could he be a dangerously not so good man? Right. So, and he identified, right.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is we've actually have had that discussion before. It's like, does that sound dangerously good or dangerously bad? Does he seem dangerously good, or does he seem dangerously bad? So we constantly refer back to like the way someone is operating in their life, right? The choices that they're making. Are they vandalizing property? Are they bullying somebody? Are they throwing rocks at cars as they drive by and then running away? Are they stealing? Are they vaping? Are they drinking? We've identified characteristics that are dangerously bad and ones that are dangerously good. And it's really cool for your son, which by the way, you're throwing them. If you're not teaching your boys this stuff, you're throwing them to the wolves and you're
Mhm.
hoping for the best,
Yeah.
in my personal opinion. And the cool thing about this is we've been able to put that lens over his eyes and even mine. And this sounds judgmental, but it's not. It's a way to be like, who do I want to surround myself with based on
Mhm.
how they're operating?
Yeah.
That's really what it boils down to. And it's really helped Mason identify the people in his life. Like, I would say some, especially when he did wrestling, right? He was like, man, he definitely hung out with the kids where iron sharpens iron. You know, they wanted the best for
Mhm.
each other. They pushed each other when they didn't feel like going to practice. You know, they did hard things together. You know, they supported they cheered each other on during matches and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it's just constantly being referred back to these things. And we do it, I would say, at least on the weekly, something comes up to we refer back to just either a simple element or a big lesson that we learned. So thanks again for what you're doing. I want to make sure guys can find everything that you're doing. So
Yeah.
please share that.
Yeah, absolutely. So dangerouslygoodmen.com. If you go over there, right at the top of the page, there's an opportunity. You can book a call with me. I'd love to get on, talk with anybody that has further questions about this, regardless of whether or not you're looking to sign up right away or if you've got a few years to go. I love talking with dads and finding out, just kind of where they're at, what their perspective is on this, because we've all got a very unique path that has brought us to the point in fatherhood that we're at. But there's a very similar thread going forward to lead our sons in a better way. Yeah. So dangerouslygoodmen.com. Book a call, send me an email at bill@menoftraction.com. I would love to talk with anybody. I want to ask you. So what you mentioned there about that dangerously good man versus dangerously bad and the behavior thing, have you found that to be really, really simple to apply?
Insanely simple. And
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 I,
it's
yeah.
like I said, that's why I call this a launching pad into, not only several evolutions to where he can earn things along the way. And you watch him go through journeys. Like, I'm going to give him this enterprising arrow for reasons being, but it's such a simple way to just identify, hey, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? How are you operating? And what are other people thinking? What are they feeling? How are they operating? And being able to view it through the lens of like, okay, which path is this, right? And there's no fluff in that, because I think when you when you view the world in that way, when you're that age and you identify something that could be dangerously bad and you have something to refer back to, I think
Mhm.
in the moment where kids are really battling with, holy crap, I know that this is wrong, but I feel so much peer pressure that if I don't do this, I'm just going to do it anyway and hope for the best. But if they're like, I think I really know the outcome of this
Yeah.
and I ain't doing it.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, again, I'm not going to go into detail out of privacy of my kids, but there have been things that have been thrown their way that they, thank God, have said no to. And the majority of the reasons they've said no to it is because, well, I've learned that that's not good.
Yeah.
Right. I had a launching pad that taught me that that wasn't the way I want to go.
Yeah, I don't know that it's necessarily something we created in this event that's unique to what we're doing, but there's a power that has been harnessed both through the promotional video that David Anderson put together for us that is so strong, and then if you remember back to that first session and the video at the event that we talk about that leads our first discussion, I think it does a really good job, especially for the young men, but for the fathers also, of expanding that timeline and that vision where we get to see how choices we make now affect who we are in the future. And that's what I love about what you were sharing. It can go so granular. It can be such a small question that might be, morally just ambiguous. It's not even that big a deal, but you can take that and you can apply that and you track it out a ways and see, okay, what if I just gave 80% on my reps at my workout? Is that dangerously good or dangerously bad? It's very quick and easy for a young man to understand that that's cheating himself. And eventually that leads to, more and more of that. So, if nothing else were to happen but that, I mean, that's a mindset shift that will transform young men's lives.
I agree, man.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, not to worry. We're going to have all the links in the show notes for you. Head on over to thedadedge.com/Friday 94 for this show. Again, thedadedge.com/Friday 94. We'll have the dangerously dangerouslygoodmen.com, link in there for you. At the very least, if you have questions, there's a way on that landing page to schedule some time with Bill if you've got questions. Also, you'll probably see, if you go to that landing page, you're going to see this beautiful 2-minute video that really maps out, the choices that our kids have, that our boys have at this age, and really looking for us to lead them. I'm going to tell you guys just as bluntly as I can. No matter if you got flooring coming up, you got vacation, like, listen, we all need flooring. And so when I say flooring, we all need something. Like, there's a home project, there's this, there's that. There's always going to be busy weekends. There's always going to be this. There's always going to be a reason, and perhaps I would even venture to say an excuse of why you don't want to do this. But what I will tell you, this will be something you will never forget, ever. And neither will your son. And what I will tell you is this could actually be the difference maker in whether your son gets in the car and drives intoxicated. This could be the difference maker of whether or not your son puts a condom on the first time he has sex. This could be the difference maker when his best friend, his buddy, his bro passes him a weed vape and he has to make a decision. Like, and that's one of thousands of decisions that a young man and an older man has to make. So what type of men are we helping to build? And listen, make no mistake, it does not matter what relationship you think you have with your son. Bill and what I will tell you is they are looking for us to lead them. They're looking for us to lead, even if they think we're quote unquote annoying, or dad, you always do this, or you always say. They are looking for you to step up and lead them. So do it. Pick up the phone and answer the call that is you are being called to do as a man, husband, and father. And in this case, a father. Answer that call. Be the leader that your son so desperately needs you to do. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. Bill, thank you so much. You're doing such amazing work in the world, my friend.
Well, thank you, Larry. It's been a great honor to be here.
Awesome, man. Again, gentlemen, thedadedge.com/Friday94, or just head straight on over to dangerouslygoodmen.com. Go out, live legendary. Take care.